Hey guys, we are back with another video. We're going to be talking finally about the ranged DPS ZvZ weapon tier list. And we're just going to dive straight into it. This is the last one we've got to do, and then we'll be moving into GVG and Hellgate tier list. So make sure you subscribe to the channel to get all that content coming up. But just going to dive straight into it. So in our S tier, S being strong, A being average, B being bad, and C being crap, we have the Siege Bow and Wailing Bow, both strong weapons right now. Let's go over them. So the Siege Bow, obviously a little bit of a channel, which means your positioning is very important. But if you get it right, I mean, it is devastating. It has a very high amount of just base damage, and the fact that it has a percent health max shred as well, which means you just start ripping people apart. Unfortunately, it just does so much damage. The AoE escalation of it is really nice. And battle mounts, it shreds through battle mounts just because of the obviously percent health shred. The percent health shred applies to the battle mount and the player, means you get a lot of damage just off that portion alone. So very strong overall. Really like the weapon. The Qs on it are pretty strong. The Ws, unfortunately, pretty weak. So I know it's hit or miss, but the E on it is just game breaking. You then have the Wailing Bow. The Wailing Bow got buffed in the last patch. It's a very in and out weapon. I mean, you run explosive arrows and obviously the demon arrow. You can run into like the tanks of a fight, fire arrow into the backline. It's going to build up damage on the front line, hit the backline with max damage and explosive arrows, and it's going to hit super hard. I've seen 2 or 3 of these wipe just like clumps and clumps of people at a time. And they're going to keep being able to do it because, I mean, honestly, it's just such a strong weapon. Moving into our A tier, then we have the Weeping Repeater, the other artifact crossbow, or one of the other artifact crossbows. Able to put like traps on the floor. Very good for poking. Pretty crap for like full engages. If you can get in a good position where you can just keep popping these into the middle of the groups, they're going to keep exploding, hitting a lot of people with the AoE escalation. Can do some work. Very nice for like zoning places as well. Forces people to take damage before coming into a fight. You can do a lot with it, but Siege Bow's just kind of that older, bigger brother that's just better. Brimstone does a lot of damage. I would actually place this ahead of Blazing right now, even though they're in the same tier. Brimstone does a lot of damage, instant damage as well, and it requires a lot more sort of, I would say, skill, in that you have to hit the clumps, which means you have to follow up really well off the tanks, you have to react well to the engages, things like that. I think Royal Robe or Scholar Robe, both very good options with it. If you put the Royal Robe down, you get a little bit extra damage as well. A little bit more expensive though, so the Scholar Robe, perfectly fine. You're going to be able to drop it really quickly, do a lot of damage, and then just get out of a fight. You should be able to drop it from a decent range as well, so it's a pretty safe playstyle. Firewall and Fire Wave, both great options, although Fire Wave typically gets nullified by Night Helmets. Firewall can completely shut off choke points, but obviously Night Helmet going to be able to walk through that as well. Fireball, the other W, can do a lot of damage if you just want to use it as poke onto the backline if you can hit them. If you're in like a structure like a castle, you can typically hit the backline with the fireballs, which can do some decent poke damage. Blazing, obviously same Qs and Ws. The E, you have to react a lot better now with this. You have to drop it kind of behind people and force them into it. It does do a lot of damage. You would never want to bring more than 1 or 2. They don't stack well, so you don't want to bring loads of these, and Brimstone just ultimately does equal to or as much, equal to or maybe even more damage with AoE escalation. So bring both, but yeah, I mean, honestly, they're both okay. Wildfire Staff then is the other option. Wildfire Staff is fantastic, and actually, if you're very good at aiming this into the right spots and cutting and hitting as many people as possible, you're going to do more damage with that than you're going to do burst damage as well, because it's instant damage with a small dot. You're going to do more damage with that than you'll potentially be doing with the Blazing, and even the Brimstone if you hit more people with it. And you do have the potential to hit. It goes for 22 meters, I believe, on like a 1 second cast time. It's very good, and personally my favorite of all the fire staffs, especially because it's quite cheap as well. I think it's very strong. We then move into the Snowball, the Hoarfrost staff, which is the Frost tier 1 artifact. Effectively, does the same sort of job as Wildfire, decent amount of damage, but instead of the dot, it also stuns them or freezes them for like a second each. Very, very, very strong. And the reason why I say it's so good is because you can catch them on an engage. Just as they're about to engage, you throw this Hoarfrost down there, catch a couple of the DPS, you can interrupt channels with it, you can interrupt casts with it. You can do so much with it that all you've got to do is kind of use it proactively. It's not as good when you're trying to full engage, but it's still usable. I mean, if you're engaging, you see this Hoarfrost come in and stun people, they're stunned into things or frozen into things. It still works, but I mean, if you use this to counter engage, interrupt all them casts that the DPS have, put it all on cooldown, and then counter engage off that, Hoarfrost is very, very good for this. Permafrost. Permafrost has a like second, I believe, CC, which has CC reduction immunity, which means it's going to guaranteed hit all of these people and freeze them for 1 second. That in itself makes it quite strong. It's a decent range and actually a decent size as well. Can do a lot of damage, especially if you pair it up with a Frost Nova. I've seen a Permafrost like do 70 to 80% of entire groups' health because he's caught them with a Frost Nova, with a Frost Bomb into the Permafrost, and they've all been hit, and they just take so much extra damage that I do really think Permafrost is like top tier right now. Life Curse. You get a Life Curse on a tank that's going to go deep, and typically I would always put it on a Grovekeeper. Grovekeeper has to dive into the back line, especially if they're running like slow in charge. They can actually keep people in it. So strong. If you get a couple of them and organize, like assign them, so you have like 3 tanks and you have 3 life curses to put on each, you can actually do a serious amount of damage through the tanks on this, and it is such a safe playstyle. You always run armor pierce, you armor pierce as many people as possible, and honestly this does so much work. And then move into the Damnation, obviously the other, or one of the other artifacts. Damnation can do a lot of damage. It had to actually get nerfed because the AoE escalation on it, because effectively it did a higher amount of base damage with a bigger range. It was able to hit entire groups, and the AoE escalation of that was giving it 100% extra damage, which in turn was allowing it to like one-shot Clothies. It was just doing so much damage that it was broken. Now it's at a point that it's more of a pierce than the damage, which means you have to be very, very like reactive. When the tanks engage, you have to be the first one to cast, because you want that pierce on as many people as possible before everybody else pops their like big damage. So you do have to be quite reactive with it. I would always use a Scholar Robe or a Royal Robe. You can be that kind of support running the Royal Robe as well for other people. That's kind of the role I play with Damnation. But yeah, I mean, it's super strong weapon. You wouldn't want to bring more than, again, 1 or 2. You get 2, you can pretty much pierce an entire Zerg with no issues, with good positioning. Armor pierce is, again, obviously very strong on top of that. So yeah, I would say that Damnation is very strong. You just don't want to stack too many of them anymore. And we move into the B tier. Now, the Baden. Now, people are going to curse me for putting Baden on the B tier. What am I doing? Well, Baden isn't a piercing projectile. It hits the first enemy it hits. The problem with that is typically the first enemy it's going to hit is a frontliner. If you hit a backline with a Baden, it's going to do a lot of damage. It's going to interrupt casts, and 100% it's going to do work. But you have to position so well with it that you have to kind of be a flank to your main Zerg to be able to hit backliners with it. And this is the problem, in my opinion. Wailing is just so much more superior for the instant damage it gives, and the fact that it can reliably hit the backlines and the squishies. So, my opinion, Baden is just not very good. Longbow, too small a radius, too small a cast range. Again, you kind of have to be quite far pushed up and in a flanking position to hit a decent amount of people with it. If you do catch a clump with Explosive Arrows Longbow, you are going to rip them apart. But again, it's nothing that the Wailing Bo can't do as well. A lot safer as well, I may add. The Infernal Staff. Now, this is something that people really underestimate. Now, you look at all the Qs, the AoE Q that does a decent amount of damage, the Ws, which Fire has, which offer either utility or a decent amount of damage. Fire as a whole is just a good weapon. You then add Infernal, which you just put the dot onto someone who's stacked up, or someone who's about to get pushed in, or grouped up, or whatever. So a tank that's having to run back because he's low health, or a healer that's having to run forward. You put it on someone, and it's going to do one of two things. It's going to force them to put the dot onto everyone else, which in itself is going to do a ton of damage, or it's going to force them out of the fight, which again is a really, really strong thing to do. So Infernals, I would say, again, don't bring loads of them, but 1 or 2, if you put them in a backline and just let people panic with them, you can do so much work. It does do a lot of damage. Glacial isn't great in like small zergs, but in larger zergs, Lagfests, obviously Glacials are kings. In larger zergs, not a bad thing to have a Glacial. You can kind of pop the Glacial and engage just as it's starting to get towards them. Very, very obvious, very easy to see, but people have made it work. I would say Glacial's not bad. Pez really, obviously you've got the Frost Bomb as well, which is amazing in zergs. That in itself is like a ZvZ relic E ability. You then have Great Frost. Great Frost you can just drop on top of them. The first hit is going to hit super hard if you hit as many people as you can. The second hit likely to be dodged out of, but you'll still catch a couple of people. Pair that with a Frost Bomb again, and you're going to do work. Icicle. Now, Icicle, I put it here, could be A tier. Honestly, it could be A tier. And it was the one I was really struggling to decide on. Icicle, you can slow everybody by such a huge amount that Icicle can be really like destructive to a Zerg, a good Icicle player. Definitely think you should play it as tank rather than DPS, which is why I was kind of struggling, because the tank offers longer duration slows, and Frost Bomb has the slow. You have a Frost Beam as well, which is also a very viable option for Icicle because you can slow everybody around that target, which means you're just going to cause hell, and you're going to be tanky to do it. So this is why I would say it would be less of a ranged DPS and more of a tank sort of support weapon. Demonic. Curse Sickle isn't great, but it's not bad damage if you can aim it onto a decent amount of people. Armor Pierce in itself is crazy, crazy strong in Zergs, especially if you can land it. Castles are amazing. I've been able to hit entire Zergs with Armor Pierce in a castle because it's just the way they've run up places and the way they've walked around chokes. You can actually hit whole lines of people. And Demonic in itself pairs really nicely with Icicle is the first thing, but also the second thing is a really large range. Pretty much the entire size of a castle corridor. You put that down and nobody's going to be able to get like decent amount of healing. You put it on top of a wild staff. Again, you have to play quite forward with that, so it's not particularly ideal. And C tier. The only thing I've put in C tier is Curse Skull. I've seen people try to make Curse Skull work in ZvZs. I've tried to make Curse Skull work in ZvZs. I played it with Mage Shoes, which is currently broken. But when they were working, I tried Mage Shoes and Gigantify Pot. I effectively just teleported into the middle of the Zerg, popped Cleric Robe, and then ran like hell as soon as it ran out, or as soon as I started taking damage, which was really fun. You played just kind of like a full engage. It's a full kamikaze playstyle, but it was super fun to do. So if that's your thing, maybe you can try it. But yeah, so this is my ZvZ tier list. I'm going to be doing a Hellgate and GVG one in the next couple of days, so make sure you subscribe to the channel for that. Hope you guys have enjoyed, and catch you later. Goodbye.